Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Danielle. Thank you so much for tuning in on this lovely Monday morning, Monday afternoon, Monday night, maybe it's even a Tuesday when you're listening to this. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend filled with lots of football. It was a very crazy weekend. This was probably the first, real-ish weekend, I guess you could say, in college football. Obviously, there's been other weekends, but upset galore this weekend. Two huge teams went down. We had the SEC back with us. So we're going to get into it today with a little quick game recap, instant reactions, if you will. I'm recording this on a Sunday morning around 9:30 a.m. I've done absolutely nothing but watch football this weekend, and it's been very relaxing. The weather here in San Diego is great. I am preparing for a week of school, a very busy week of school, lots of exams this week, papers, and just getting ahead, some job applications. So, it's a crazy week for me. But without further ado, let us get into this instant reactions. Like I said, it was an upset galore. We have the SEC back. We also have news that the Pac-12 is back, which I will get into on Thursday and fully break that down. The Buffs are playing, which I'm excited about. We're going to do some instant reactions, some what we learned, and because I'm recording this a little early, the AP poll is not out yet, but we will cover that all on Thursday. But without further ado, we have a lot of games to cover, so let's get into it. The games I'm going to cover today. First up, we have University of Central Florida versus East Carolina. This was 51-28 UCF. Let's look at some of the box score stats. So for UCF passing, Gabriel went 32 of 47 for 408 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. The team totaled 40 carries for 224 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Carrying the way for them was McRae with 83 yards and 1 touchdown. Robinson added 9 receptions for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns in the air. Harris and Cook also added 1 touchdown each. On the East Carolina side, we have Allers, who added 14-29 for 250 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. So overall, a very heavy throwing game. As you can see, it was a very high-scoring game as well. And then for East Carolina rushing, they totaled 54 carries for 244 yards and 1 touchdown. Passing, 3 touchdowns for 14 receptions and 215 yards. So, as you can see, UCF just dominated most of the ball. Gabriel, like I said, threw for 408 yards. This was UCF's American Athletic Conference, so AAC opener. This was their 5th straight season in which they won their opener. This was marked by their offensive brilliance and however, there was some pre-snap penalties in the beginning of the game, but it was not a perfect game, like Gabriel said. He said, you can never play a perfect game. We got out there and we put up 51 points. UCF totaled to 632 total yards after amassing 660 in its opening. They got huge performances from receivers Jalen Robinson and Marlon Williams, like I said, but however, they had 19 penalties for 139 yards, and 10 of those came in the opening quarter, with 7 of them being false start flags. The Knights went from 1st and 30 from their 5-yard scoring line, from their own 5-yard line to score on its drive. In the first half, like I said, the Knights soon settled in and blew the game open with a pair of touchdowns in the final 5 minutes before half. So they used the momentum from the last 5 minutes of the first half, from the second quarter, to basically blow the game away. East Carolina was in it for the first half, but UCF just took their offense and ran with it. Like I said, on the East Carolina side, Holton Ashers threw for 215 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is their opening after they had to delay their season after coronavirus-related scheduling changes. And they played in an essentially empty Dodie Fickham Stadium due to COVID-19 protocols, with only a smattering of player family members in the attendance. After a game-opening drive, the Pirates lost fumbles on the side of the 50 on 3 consecutive first-quarter possessions. By the time it was over, the school had said the Pirates had come within 2 yards of matching the most allowed in a season for any school opener. So definitely not a defensive performance by the East Carolina Pirates. There's no doubt about that. Head coach Mike Houston said, really had the opportunity to get the control of this ball game and have 3 turnovers. You have 3 turnovers there in the first quarter, to which you're around midfield. You get the chance to stick the ball in again, to take control of the game, to get a lead on what everybody regards as the best team in our league. And those mistakes, you can't just keep making them. The big takeaway is that this is the second road game for UCF to start the season. They are now 2-0, and they are soon to be jumping in the rankings. Coach Josh Heupel said, some of the things we have to correct in this one are obvious to everyone watching the football game. I believe he will do those things. The Knights are scheduled to play their first home game next Saturday against Tulsa. If you guys remember, Tulsa almost upset Oklahoma State last week and had to have scheduling conflicts due to COVID-19 again. The Knights are expected to jump in the polls as well. They are currently ranked number 14, and they are expected to jump. For East Carolina, they travel to Georgia State next Saturday. And yes, our next game we're going to cover is kind of a big one, I guess you could say. If you guys remember last week, Louisville, University of Louisville, was involved in probably the biggest game of the week with Miami and Louisville in the ACC opener. Now they played the Pittsburgh Panthers. It was 23-20 Pitt. Let's get to the box score. On the Louisville side, Cunningham threw for 9 out of 21, 107 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions. He had a quarterback rating of 33.4. However, it was not much cleaner on the Pittsburgh side, as Pickett threw for 22 of 38 for 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception for a QB rating of 47.7. On the Louisville rushing side, they went a total of 30 carries for 116 yards and 1 touchdown. The Pittsburgh rushing went 40 yards for 156. 40 carries, 156 yards, and 0 touchdowns. And it was not a pretty game. It was more of a defensive game, if you will. Patrick Jones wanted number 21's Pittsburgh's defense to be the best in the country. We want it all. That's what the senior defensive end said. They're certainly playing it like it. It was a very defensive battle, obviously. Could have been more low scoring. However, holding an offense like Louisville that stayed in contention with Miami for most of the game last week, a very high-heart offense, as we saw it today against Florida State. It was quite the battle. Jones collected 3 of Pitt's 7 sacks. 7 sacks isn't insane. They helped the Panthers beat number 24, Louisville. They are currently ranked 21, the Panthers, 23-20 on Saturday. The Pittsburgh Panthers now 3-0 total and 2-0 in the ACC. This is their best start since 2014, and this adheres to the Panthers' blueprint of tough physical defense and just enough offense to get by. They are hoping that this strategy will carry them to the conference championship game in December, which you can definitely see given the way everything is going. It is working so far. They held the Cardinals, who are now 1-2 and 0-2 in ACC play, 233 yards in total, and never let Cunningham get comfortable. Like I said, he had 1 touchdown and 3 picks. The last hit a 4th down interception by Jason Pinnock with 1:19 remaining. So choked under pressure. Nothing else you can say about that. Cunningham left on a stretcher after the play with an undisclosed injury. Coach Scott Satterfield said the junior is feeling all the extremities and is being evaluated. The sight of the rising star heading into the tunnel with his head strapped to the board marked a difficult end to a difficult day for Louisville, especially after the game last week versus Miami. They struggled to generate much of anything offensively thanks to the relentless pursuit of Pitt's defensive front. We played some good D-lines, but they're different. They play fast. They play physical. Panthers coach Pat Nuzini said, I know the Steel Curtain is the Pittsburgh Steelers, but today we were dominant up front. When they weren't, the secondary picked up most of the time. Other than the 21-yard touchdown from Cunningham to Atwell on a busted coverage, the Cardinals found little room to work. 3 times Louisville had the ball in the fourth quarter with a chance to take the lead. The drives ended with an interception, punt, interception. Let's look at the big picture. Louisville Cardinals likely to fall out of the polls. They're currently ranked 24th, and Pitt is expected to rise a little, even with teams in the conference currently not playing. Be allowed in the polls this week. They're expected to stay or probably move up to at least 20, I would say, given the way that this week went with Army losing. Louisville's off next week, then visits Georgia Tech. And Pitt wraps up a 4-game home stint at Heinz Field to start the season when North Carolina State, NC State, visits next Saturday. Next up, we have the return of the SEC. It felt so good to have SEC football back. Like I've said, I feel like SEC football is the staple of college football. I don't think that's being biased. I feel like anyone I know who goes to an SEC school really just believes that is like the bread and butter of football. And the first game we're going to talk about today, obviously there was the Mississippi State game and the LSU game, which we will get into, as well as the Oklahoma-Kansas State game. We'll get into all of those towards the end because those are the big games to go over. But we have Kentucky and Auburn. Kentucky has been ranked for the first time in years, I believe, 23. Auburn is ranked at number 8, and the final score was 29-12 Auburn. Let's look at the box score here. On the Kentucky side, you have Terry Wilson. He went 24 of 37 for 239 yards. He had 1 touchdown and 1 interception. On the Auburn side, Bo Nix had 16 of 27, 233 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Kentucky rushing totals 40 carries for 145 yards and 1 touchdown. On the Auburn side, Bo Nix actually led the rushing, but went 30 carries for 91 yards and 1 touchdown, brought to you by DJ Williams. So it was a very pass-heavy game, if you can tell. Nix threw for 233 yards and 3 second-half touchdowns. The Tigers turned a three-quarter scare into a comfortable win by capitalizing on a late turnover in Kentucky's failed punt in the lone top 25 matchup of the Southeastern Conference opening weekend. So the SEC, this was the only ranked opponent this weekend, and many people were expecting this to be the game of the weekend. However, it was certainly not. Bo made a couple of really good throws for touchdowns. Auburn coach Gus Malzahn said, "I thought Seth Williams made 2 big-time plays right there to help us. I'm just excited for our team. It's a good measure of where we're at." This game was played before a COVID-19 limited crowd of 17,000 plus, mostly Auburn students. And the most electric moment of the game for the sparse audience was a 100-yard interception return, which was called back for targeting just before halftime. This came after the officials upheld the call that Chris Rodriguez was down inside the 1. He was clearly in, Kentucky coach Mark Stoops said. "I can't really give it a good explanation. I can't really give an explanation all day. I don't know if us wearing these masks and all that. I don't know. That was tough. That was a big swing." Sorry, something else. Nix delivered some big plays to start an encore to a promising freshman season, especially to Williams. He completed 16 of 27 passes and also ran for 34 yards. Kentucky quarterback Terry Wilson returned from a knee injury that cost him most of last season. He went 24 of 37 for 239 yards. The athletic Williams capped his 6-catch, 112 performance with a 4-yard touchdown in the fourth quarter. You got to know if that's your ball when it's in the air, he said. The big takeaway is that Kentucky still hasn't beaten a top 10 SEC team on the road since 1964. Auburn, they have to get better on third down defense. There's no doubt about that. Receivers Williams and Schwartz look like the big play threats the Tigers were accepting. But, however, they do have a long way to go. The fact that Bo Nix was leading them with 34 yards says something. Up next, we have Kentucky visiting Mississippi and Ole Miss in its home opener on Saturday, and Auburn will visit number 4 Georgia on Saturday in one of the biggest early matchups of the season, regardless of conference, of potential division contenders. Next up on our list, a bit of a shocker here. We have Texas versus Texas Tech. This was 63-56 Texas in overtime. Texas Tech gave the number 8 Longhorns quite a scare. On the passing side, we have Heisman favorite Sam Ehlinger. He went 27 of 40 for 262 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Texas Tech Bowman went 31 of 52 for 325 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. On the Texas Longhorns rushing side, Ingram led the way with 12 carries for 89 yards. The team totaled 48 carries for 214 yards and 2 touchdowns. It capitalized by touchdowns rushing touchdowns by Ellinger and Johnson. Ellinger continues to prove to the dual threat quarterback everyone thought he was, and this season is no exception. On the Texas Tech side, we have Thompson, who went 16 carries for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. In total, the team went 24 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. It was mostly a passing game, their air raid offense, like you guys know. Texas Tech is not known for their defensive performance, honestly. Texas, however, was trailing Texas Tech by 15 points with just more than 3 minutes to play. Tom Herman said, he looked over at me and said, they left us too much time. We're going to tie this thing up and win in overtime. And I believed him, Tom Herman said. Ellinger delivered on his promise. He rallied Texas from a 56-41 deficit in the final 3:13 with touchdown passes to Brennan Eagles and Joshua Moore to force overtime. Defensive tackle Keon Coburn said, that's the Tom Brady of college football. That's later we have. Ellinger looked at the clock and did his thing with brilliant flash. He first connected with Eagles for a touchdown, and then a Longhorn snack and onside kick when the ball bounced high. After finding Moore for another score to get 56-54, Ellinger passed to Eagles for the 2-point conversion. Texas got the ball first in overtime, and the Ellinger-Moore connection did it again. It's clear Texas was just on another level today. Obviously, the air raid offense in Texas Tech is no exception, but he finished 262 yards with 5 touchdowns and also ran for a score. The big takeaway is that Texas Tech were on the brink of delivering second-year head coach Mike Wells a signature win over a top 10 team and big rivalry. They blew a 2-touchdown lead in the final 3 minutes that could have crushed a team's confidence. Bowman's big day was overshadowed by the 3 interceptions, the first 2 set of Texas touchdowns in the first half. The poll implications are that Texas could be rising, although it was not that impressive. The big comeback and the 2 teams ranked higher than Texas losing on Saturday could only help its chances to move up. Like you guys know, LSU and Oklahoma both suffered losses, and it looks like right now Texas is the favorite in the Big 12, given that Oklahoma lost today. Next up, Texas will host TCU, Texas Christian University, next Saturday, and Texas Tech travels to Kansas State, the one and only, on Saturday. Next up, we have another SEC game to get to, Alabama and Mizzou. Like I've said, I almost went to Mizzou multiple times. Always interesting to think about, but we had 38-19 Alabama. Little bit of a closer game than I expected, but this was like a preseason game in all honesty. And this was the first game for the number 2 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. So Mac Jones went 18-24 for 249 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the Mizzou passing side, Robinson went 19-25, 185 yards and 1 touchdown. Young, also their star quarterback, many are expecting to take over for Jones after the season, went 5 for 8 for 54 yards. On the Alabama rushing side, Najee Harris went 17 carries for 98 yards and 3 touchdowns. They totaled 36 carries for 111 yards and 3 touchdowns. Mizzou rushing totaled 34 carries for 69 yards and 1 touchdown. So, like we said, not the most exciting day for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Kind of a walk in the park. They looked fine as they begin their SEC-only schedule on Saturday night. Mac Jones, like I said, 3 for 249 yards and 2 scores. Nick Saban said after the game, I think from a team standpoint, when you play a first game, you have to sort of figure this thing out. You have to figure out where you and the last thing is. Where do I get better? Everyone on our team has a lot of maturity in it, which is what they need to do better. There are definitely areas they need to improve. They had a few too many penalties against a Missouri team that is known for giving up penalties. They also had to get its fast-tempo offense going against its backups in the fourth quarter. They looked every bit like a national title contender, though. Waddle finished with 8 catches for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. And like I said, Harris ran for 98 yards and 3 scores. They spoiled the debate of the new Mizzou Tigers coach Eli Drinkovich and their 27th straight win over the SEC before a COVID-19 curtain crowd of 11,738 fans at Fairwater Field. TCU transfer Sean Robinson, who started for the Tigers over Connor Basic, like I said, for 185 yards and a score. Basic also had a touchdown scaper. The only question is who is going to score their touchdowns for the Crimson Tide. They had Waddle and Harris both with shots. Mac Jones also put out on the ground a little. Jones said that Waddle is a great player. He gets open. That's his job, and he does a great job doing it. We have a great relationship going back to the summer 7-on-7s, getting their chemistry, all the late nights indoors. The poll implications here are that Alabama is expected to stay at number 2. Clemson didn't play this week. Oklahoma lost, and they didn't lose, so they're still at number 2, essentially. This is now their fifth straight win against Missouri, and have won 92 straight against unranked foes. Devontae Smith also added 8 catches for 89 yards. Missouri was overmatched, but showed plenty of fight, and they can build off that. This helped this cause that the former Appalachian State coach has a pandemic-altered offseason to install his system, and the kinks were particularly evident when Alabama was pulling away in the first half. The Crimson Tide will play their opener against Texas A&M next Saturday, and Missouri will head to Tennessee. Next up, we have a bit of a surprising game. You guys know I'm a Georgia Bulldogs fan. I root for them. No doubt about that. Obviously, I am a non-biased as much as I can be, but I do have a special spot for the Bulldogs. And I expected them to be a little better in their game against in Arkansas than I thought, in all honesty. The final score was 37-10 Georgia. Arkansas has been picked last in the SEC by almost every analyst out there. Their consensus worst team in the SEC preseason-wise, and they struggled to get their feet off the ground in the first half. But Bennett for Georgia went 211 yards and 2 touchdowns on 20 of 29. You guys have all heard about JT Daniels. He was not cleared because of an injury, and redshirt freshman DeJuan Mathis had a slow start for the Bulldogs. This is why they were trailing. He went 18 of 17 for 55 yards and 1 interception. Bennett has not played a game since 2017, but he led them to a 37-10 victory. On the Arkansas side, Franks went 19 of 36 for 200 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Burks also added an interception on 1 pass. For the Georgia rushing, it was 42 carries for 121 yards and 1 touchdown from White. And yeah, kind of a crazy week. Obviously, Georgia is ranked very highly in the AP poll, and no one was expecting them to struggle this much. Bennett said, "When I left, I never thought I'd be back, but when I came back, I thought I'd be here." Like we said, Bennett went from junior college. He hadn't won an SEC game since 2017 and is back at Georgia now. He entered in the second quarter and led Georgia to a first-half field goal, and then marched the Bulldogs on 3 straight second-half possessions that ended in touchdowns. Georgia's coach, Kirby Smart, has another decision to make after Bennett went 20 for 29 for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was number 2 behind Jake Fromm last year, and he was expected to be number 3 in 2020 behind Jamie Newman and JT Daniels, but obviously now Newman has opted out of the season, and JT Daniels is currently succumbed to injury. So, very interesting to see. Kirby Smart said, "It was a really sloppy first half. I felt like I was in an extra innings baseball game. I thought we were stagnant and took undisciplined penalties. Every time we had something going, we shot ourselves in the foot. You can't win football games like that. We've got to improve and get better." Bennett's next 3 drives resulted in 2 touchdown passes and an 81-yard drive, capped by a 6-yard touchdown run. The big takeaway for this is that even with their uneven play, they could move up in the poll after number 3 Oklahoma lost to Kansas State. Georgia will play its home opener against number 8 Auburn next Saturday, and Arkansas travels to Mississippi State, which put on a great performance today against LSU. So, like we said, Georgia could move up because of Oklahoma's loss. It was an uneven battle. No one was expecting them to struggle this much, but they got through, and they did it. Now, we have 3 more games to get to, people, so let's do it. We have Miami versus Florida State, 52-10, Miami. This one, not a shocker. Florida State's fall from the grace in the glory days of college football in the early 2010s to now where they are is kind of sad. They are now 0-2, I believe. And on Florida State's passing side, Blackman went 16 of 26 for 120 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. King went 29 of 40 for Miami with 267 yards and 2 touchdowns. Florida State rushing had 36 carries for 151 yards. Miami had 37 carries for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns. The kickoff was held because of lightning near Hard Rock Stadium, and the team received clearance to start on time. Miami coach Manny Diaz said, "We get to the stadium, we're getting ready to go through run-throughs, and you find out there's a possibility of a lightning delay. All our guys and their abilities to adjust with all that's been thrown to them this year, they're worthy victors tonight." Cameron Harris and Don Shaley scored twice, and Brennan Johnson and D. Wiggins each caught touchdown passes for Miami, who are now 3-0 in total and 2-0 in the ACC. The Seminoles are 0-2 and 0-2 overall. They were out with head coach Mike Novell, who tested positive for coronavirus, and he remained in Tallahassee under quarantine. Assistant coach Chris Thompson served as the head coach. Novell could not help out in any circumstances. He purely had to watch the game at home. They really dominated in all the phases. Disappointed for our team, for our players, for our coaches, and our fan base. Definitely not the way we wanted to play. This is something that completely falls on me. I've got to do a better job of putting our guys in a position to play a better brand of football, Mike Novell said to reporters over the phone. King, a graduate transfer from Houston, completed 6 touchdown passes without an interception through his first 3 games with the Hurricanes. He also ran for 65 yards on 8 carries against Florida State. Poll implications here is that Miami will move up. They are currently number 12. Florida State, not much to say there. I hope Mike Novell recovers well from coronavirus, but the attendance of 12,806 was still to sell out. The crowd fell within the 20% capacity allowed at a 65,000-seat Hard Rock Stadium to comply with COVID-19 distancing protocols. Up next, Miami will be at number 1 Clemson on October 10th. So they got a few weeks off here. And Florida State will host Jacksonville State next Saturday. 3 more games, people. We got this. Next up, we have Tennessee versus South Carolina. On the Tennessee side, passing totals, they went 20 of 32 for 261 yards and 1 touchdown. South Carolina went 25 of 39 for 209 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. On the rushing side for the Tennessee Vols, it was 33 carries, 133 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Overall touchdowns were added by Gray and Coronacito. The Vols quarterback on the South Carolina rushing side, 35 carries, 89 yards, and 2 touchdowns overall. Bit of a closer game than we thought. South Carolina was not expected to be a contender. And they certainly kept the 6th-ranked Vols on their toes throughout the game. They came on top no matter how difficult things got. However, the Vols squandered a 2-touchdown lead in the second half and held on to defeat the Gamecocks 31-27. The game wasn't decided until a Tennessee punt touched South Carolina Cam Smith, and the Vols' Jimmy Holiday recovered it with 1:24 to go. Tennessee coach Jeremy Pruitt said, "I'm tickled that they found a way, Despite the nerve-wracking finish, Pruitt said it was his mission to accomplish for the Vols. This was their opener. They looked to have the SEC conference and season opener in hand when they were ahead 21-7 on Earl Gray's 12-yard scoring drive. South Carolina rallied behind first-time starter Colin Hill with 2 touchdowns and a field goal. A lot of inconsistencies to correct for Tennessee's quarterback Guarantero and the offensive going forward. Tennessee coach said, "We've got to go back and figure out where we were offensively and what we created and some consistency, but we put some drives together and finished the game off." South Carolina looked like they had a final chance when it forced Tennessee to punt with 90 seconds left. The punt touched Cam Smith, like I said. No one play losses the game, Will Muschamp said, South Carolina coach. South Carolina with a new offensive coordinator, and ex-Colorado State coach Mike Bobo, and new quarterback and grad transfer Hill. Showed some spark on its opening drive, 75 yards for a touchdown. The big takeaway here is that Tennessee will probably not be falling out of the polls. They had a solid SEC road win to start the season. And COVID-19 crowd, South Carolina had permission from the state to allow 20,000 people in their stadium. There were 15,009, which turned out sitting at prescribed spots in the socially distanced stadium. Those 2 made an impact. You couldn't really tell it was empty. South Carolina fans did a great job of coming out and playing, and they were loud. Up next, Tennessee will play its home opener against Missouri, which lost to Alabama today. And South Carolina will go on the road to face number 5, Florida, who was absolutely dominant against Ole Miss today with Kyle Trask having 5 touchdowns. So not expected to be an easy matchup for the Gamecocks whatsoever. Now, we got our 2 big games of the day. Don't we, people? Mississippi State versus LSU. LSU is ranked number 6. They are presumably going to go down today after they lost 44-34 to Mississippi State. And KJ Costello's 623 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interception day. Like you may know, LSU lost all but 5 starters this season, and they definitely showed it this game. New Mississippi State head coach Mike Leach put its air raid offense in the hands of a transfer quarterback who showed up over the summer, and the results were nothing defending national championship LSU or the Southeastern Conference had ever seen. For LSU, the passing, Brennan went 27 of 46 completions, 345 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Like I said, Costello went 36 of 60, 623 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. That's the main stats of the day. Mike Leach definitely brought the air raid off system to a conference known for its defense, to say the least. This was an SEC record 623 yards and 5 touchdowns. They knocked off the 6th-ranked LSU 44-34 on Saturday. KJ Costello, who transferred from Stanford, as you may know. I don't know if it's an individual could visualize this taking place, who was Stanford starters in 2017 and 2018 before head and hand injuries sidelined him last season. I wasn't visualizing sitting here breaking records. I'm excited about the potential that this offense has. Believe it or not, we did leave a lot on the field today. Costello's passing yardage in the first game since moving from Silicon Valley to Starkville eclipsed the 554 yards Georgia's Eric Zeller had against Southern Mississippi in 1993 to set the conference record. He needed most of that to make up for his 2 interceptions and 2 lost fumbles, which helped LSU to rally the game at 34. LSU really struggled for most of the game. Like I said, they lost 5 of their starters, and LSU quarterback Miles Brennan intermediately showed promise in its debut in the place of, as some of you may know, Joe Burrow, who is now the number 1 overall draft pick, playing with the Cincinnati Bengals. Head coach Ed Orgeron, we couldn't stay with those guys. Too many misassignments, too many guys running free. 4 of Costello's touchdown passes covered between 24 and 74 yards. LSU safety said this was an embarrassing for a program as known as DBU, Defensive Back University. It's going into a boxing ring and getting knocked out. He was confident, Mike Leach was confident, that his air raid offense would work in the mighty SEC because it has before. The poll implications here is that LSU is bound to plummet after giving up so many yards and points at home. Mississippi State has made a case to crack the top 25, which is very interesting to see. Up next, Mississippi State will host Arkansas, who put up a fight against Georgia, and that'll be an interesting matchup. And LSU visits Vanderbilt on Saturday. And lastly for our games, probably the biggest, closest upset of the week. No one was really expecting this. I have been on the Mike Leach Mississippi State bandwagon train for a while. I expected them to make flashes, but not many people did. But Oklahoma, Kansas State, that was a game. Oklahoma lost 38-35 against Kansas State. Spencer Rattler threw 3 interceptions, which is the most since 2014 for Oklahoma, and the most under Lincoln Riley since his tenure in Oklahoma. Skylar Thompson went 18 of 25 for 304 yards, 1 touchdown, and 0 interceptions. Rattler went 30 of 41 for 387 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Kansas State lost its opener to Arkansas State 2 weeks ago, which was honestly embarrassing. And they had its roster depleted by COVID-19, entered the game against Oklahoma as a 4-touchdown underdog. This is one of the biggest upsets of this season. It was a last-minute field goal that saved them, and Oklahoma freshman Spencer Rattler, who has been seen as a Heisman favorite, passed for 387 yards and 4 touchdowns, like I said, but the 3 interceptions killed them. This was Oklahoma's regular season loss of its 4 times. It has reached they have had a regular season loss each of the 4 times it reached the college football playoffs. They hope that they can bounce back, but it's going to be difficult this season, especially with Texas's win on Saturday and such a weird season. I feel like in a weirder season like this, they will definitely allow for, the committee will allow for more leeway, if you will. But Lincoln Riley said, "We are very disappointed and the resolve is very strong. We know how to respond to a loss around here and we'll do it. It's going to take away every single one of us. Oklahoma will likely drop in the polls. Defensively, it's going to take some of our busted coverage on the big plays and a few big tackles." Riley said to give Kansas State some credit. Those are tackles they didn't miss. They tackled better than we did. Like I said, Oklahoma Sooners will likely fall from number 3. I mean, it's not likely. They will fall from number 3 after this loss against a team that they were supposed to outmatch. And up next, Kansas State will host Texas Tech on Saturday, and Oklahoma travels to Iowa State. If you guys remember, the Cyclones beat the Sooners 3 years ago, and nearly upset them last year before falling 42-41. So it's not an easy matchup by any means. What did we learn from this week? Well, obviously, with the Pac-12 coming back, there's more room for these teams to make a run now that LSU and Oklahoma lost and other top 10 teams like Auburn struggled a bit. Nothing is truly what it seems, as we saw with LSU especially. It also looks like, however, that it could be a Florida-Alabama SEC championship over an Alabama-Georgia, which is what many of us expected, given Florida's reign and Kyle Trask's dominant performance, as well as Georgia's questions at quarterback, with JT Daniels now being injured, and their struggle against Arkansas today. Clemson had the week off, so they are expected to stay at number 1 for the AP poll, and Mississippi State is likely to enter the top 25 because of their dominant win. And Texas still needs a defense. And that is my takeaway, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to my rapid reactions. Stay tuned for Thursday. We will be covering all things Pac-12 return, covering week 5, which is absolutely crazy to me. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Danielle. Once again, thank you so much for listening. If you could, please remember to rate and review us and subscribe to us on iTunes and wherever you get your podcasts. Really helps us out with a good review. If you enjoy this podcast, if you enjoy hearing me talk about college football, we appreciate you guys so much. And don't forget to follow us on our social media. As for now, have a great Monday and a great week, and I'll talk to you all on Thursday. Have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.